"Let her go. We will not pay for the surgery." Those were the exact words my father said to the attending physician while I lay trapped in a coma. He signed the Do Not Resuscitate order without a second thought, just to save money. When I woke up, I did not scream or cry. I just listened, and then I did something much worse that left him completely bankrupt in 48 hours. I am Riley, 32 years old, and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a forensic accountant, I had spent my entire adult life tracking hidden assets and uncovering financial fraud for major corporations. Yet the biggest fraud of all was the family that raised me. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Chicago meant privilege to outsiders when they looked at my family. My father, Richard, was the prominent chief executive officer of Oasis Care, a highly lucrative chain of luxury assisted living facilities scattered across the Midwest. To the public, he was a philanthropist and a dedicated healthcare magnate. Inside our sprawling estate, however, emotional coldness permeated every corner. My childhood was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My parents viewed children not as humans to nurture, but as investments to manage. My younger sister, Megan, was the ultimate golden child. She was beautiful, entirely compliant with their shallow values, and currently running a failing cosmetics brand that my father heavily subsidized. I was the opposite. I was analytical, quiet, and fiercely independent. I chose to study forensic accounting, a career my father deemed unglamorous, until he realized he could force me to do his internal auditing for free. The nightmare began on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was driving home from a grueling tax audit when a commercial truck ran a red light and crushed my vehicle against a concrete barrier. The impact shattered my spine and plunged me into darkness. I woke up 7 days later. The sterile smell of antiseptic burned my nostrils. Harsh fluorescent lights assaulted my vision as I forced my heavy eyelids open. A steady rhythmic beep from the heart monitor echoed in the stark white hospital room. Pain radiated from my lower back, a searing, inescapable agony that made it impossible to move. I tried to speak, but my throat felt like it was coated in shattered glass. A nurse standing by the window turned around. She was holding a medical chart and wiping tears from her cheeks. She rushed to my bedside the moment she saw my eyes fluttering. She poured a tiny amount of water into my dry mouth and called for the doctor. Once the initial medical checks were completed, I managed to whisper a question about my parents. I expected to hear that they were waiting outside, frantic with worry. Instead, the nurse hesitated. Her face went pale, and her hands trembled as she clutched her clipboard. She looked at me with profound sorrow and broke down. She told me the truth because she could not bear to hide it. 2 days ago, my father, Richard, had stood in this very room with the chief surgeon. My spine required a highly specialized and immediate operation to prevent permanent paralysis and save my life. The out-of-pocket cost was $120,000. The nurse recounted exactly what my father had said. He told the doctors to pull the plug. He declared that I was a useless investment now, and that keeping me alive in a vegetative state was just a waste of his hard-earned money. He signed the Do Not Resuscitate order, turned on his heel, and walked out of the intensive care unit to attend a country club dinner. The only reason I was breathing, the only reason the surgeons had operated and saved my life, was because of my own financial foresight. As a forensic accountant, I knew never to trust anyone with my security. Years ago, I had secretly established an ironclad catastrophic medical insurance policy that automatically activated upon my admission to the trauma center. My father had literally signed my death warrant to save a fraction of his wealth, completely unaware that my private safety net had bypassed his authority. I lay there trapped in a rigid neck brace, processing the sheer cruelty of it. I knew exactly how much money Richard had hidden in offshore accounts and shell companies. Oasis Care brought in tens of millions in annual revenue, yet my life was not worth a fraction of that to him. The heavy wooden door of the hospital room swung open. My family walked in, but they did not look like people arriving to visit a recovering loved one. They looked like they were walking into a boardroom to finalize a hostile takeover. Richard entered first wearing a bespoke charcoal Italian suit, his silver hair perfectly styled. Behind him was my mother, Catherine, dripping in diamond tennis bracelets and carrying a limited edition designer handbag. Then came my sister Megan, checking her reflection in her phone screen. Beside her was her husband Andre. Andre was an African-American man in his 30s who worked as an investment director at my father's firm. He was wearing a flashy gold watch and a custom-tailored blazer that he definitely could not afford on his actual salary. They stopped dead in their tracks when they saw me awake and sitting up. The silence in the room was deafening. There were no gasps of joy. There were no tears of relief. There were no rushed hugs or prayers of gratitude. There was only pure, unadulterated annoyance plastered across their faces. Richard adjusted his silk tie, looking at me like a bad stock portfolio that refused to write itself off. Andre groaned loudly, completely ignoring the fact that I was covered in bandages, bruised, and hooked up to several intravenous lines. "Well, this is just fantastic," Andre complained, crossing his arms and rolling his eyes. "So does the lawyer have to cancel the death certificate now? We just put the non-refundable deposit down on that lakefront mansion this morning, based on the expected life insurance payout." I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. They had already been spending the money they thought they would get from my death. Megan slapped Andre lightly on the arm but nodded in absolute agreement. She looked at me with open disgust. "Honestly, Riley, you always have to ruin my plans. We had the interior decorator all lined up to start working on the new house next week. Now we have to figure out how to cover the mortgage." I could barely breathe. The absolute lack of empathy was staggering even for them. I looked at my mother, hoping for a single shred of maternal instinct. Catherine stepped forward, adjusting her silk scarf to make sure it sat perfectly on her shoulders. She did not reach out to hold my hand. She did not ask about my pain. Instead, she pointed an accusing finger directly at my face. "The accident was your own fault anyway, Riley," Catherine said, her voice dripping with venom. "If you did not insist on driving that pathetic old sedan instead of buying a safe luxury SUV, this never would have happened. Your father works incredibly hard to maintain our lifestyle. Where exactly did you expect him to find over $100,000 to throw out the window on a surgery that might not even work? You are so incredibly selfish to put this burden on us." I felt a cold realization wash over me. They truly saw me as nothing more than a financial drain. But Catherine was not finished. Her cruelty had no boundaries. "Anyway," Catherine continued, casually waving her hand in the air, "since you were basically legally dead yesterday, and the doctors said there was no hope, your father and I went to the bank. We closed out that old joint savings account you opened back in college. There was quite a bit of cash sitting in there. We used it to buy Andre a brand new Porsche for his client meetings. It is the least you could do for the family considering the stress you caused us this week. Consider it your way of paying us back for raising you." My blood ran completely cold. That joint savings account had been opened when I was 18. My parents had forced me to keep them on the account for emergencies. I had been transferring a portion of my freelance auditing income into it for years, building a massive safety net. They had stolen my money. They had taken the money I earned working 80-hour weeks auditing corrupt companies, and they used it to buy a luxury sports car for my entitled brother-in-law. I looked at the four of them standing around my hospital bed. They were literally dividing the assets of my corpse while I was still breathing in front of them. The betrayal was so absolute, so complete, that it bypassed sadness entirely and hardened into something sharp and unbreakable. I did not shed a single tear. I did not scream at them for stealing my life savings. I did not confront my father about the Do Not Resuscitate order. As a forensic accountant, I knew that showing your hand before you had all the leverage was a fool's game. I just smiled. It was a weak, trembling smile that made me look compliant and utterly defeated. I looked down at my hands resting on the stark white hospital blanket. "I understand," I whispered hoarsely, making sure my voice sounded broken. "Family comes first. I am just glad the money went to something useful for Andre's career. My eyes locked onto Richard. He smiled smugly, his shoulders dropping as he relaxed. He was entirely satisfied that I was back in my place as the obedient, silent scapegoat of the family. He patted the foot of my bed dismissively. "Get some rest, Riley," Richard said in his booming corporate voice. "We will check on you next week when we have some free time. The launch party for Megan's new cosmetic line is this weekend, so we will be quite tied up." They turned and walked out of the room, chatting animatedly about the catering menu for the upcoming party. They left me alone with my broken spine and a drained bank account. But as the door clicked shut, my weak smile vanished. A fierce, burning clarity took over my mind. They thought they had won. They thought I was just a disposable asset they could liquidate. They had no idea that when they signed that document to end my life, they had destroyed the only thing keeping them safe from federal prison. I was the one who managed the hidden books for Oasis Care. I knew where every single stolen dollar was buried. The 48-hour countdown to their complete and total destruction had just begun. The moment the hospital room door clicked shut, the illusion of the obedient, broken daughter vanished entirely. I ripped the medical tape from my arm, pulling the intravenous needle out in one swift motion. The sharp sting was absolutely nothing compared to the raging fire radiating down my shattered spine, but I did not have the luxury of time. I pressed the call button and demanded my discharge paperwork. The attending physician rushed in, arguing with me for 20 agonizing minutes. He warned me about the severe risks of leaving against medical advice, so soon after spinal stabilization surgery, threatening that one wrong move could paralyze me forever. I ignored his warnings, signed the hospital liability waivers with a remarkably steady hand, and walked out the front doors. Every single step sent a shockwave of pure blinding agony through my nervous system, but the pain served as a necessary fuel. It kept my mind razor sharp. It kept the anger burning. I hailed a cab and gave the driver an address in the industrial district, a gritty part of Chicago my superficial family would never dare to set foot in. My family believed I lived in a modest, overpriced studio apartment downtown, a place they occasionally visited just to criticize my lack of square footage and mock my lifestyle choices. They had absolutely no idea about the loft. Located above an abandoned textile warehouse, my real apartment was a highly secure digital fortress. I paid the lease entirely through a blind trust. The heavy steel door required a biometric fingerprint scan and a complex 12-character passcode. When the deadbolts clicked open, I stepped into the only place on earth I truly felt safe. There were no fake family portraits here. There were only high-capacity server racks humming quietly in the corner. 3 massive ultra-high-definition monitors mounted on a reinforced standing desk, and heavy steel filing cabinets filled with encrypted hard drives. I dragged my battered body toward the ergonomic leather chair, gritting my teeth so hard my jaw ached as my spine protested the rigid movement. I strapped the heavy medical brace tighter around my torso to stabilize my back and swallowed 2 prescription painkillers dry. The medicine would eventually take the edge off the physical trauma, but I needed my mind entirely clear for the execution of my plan. I booted up the main terminal. The large screens flared to life, casting a cold, calculating blue glow across the dark room. I typed in the decryption keys. A progress bar flashed across the center screen, unlocking 5 years of meticulous, exhausting, and entirely unpaid labor. For half a decade, Richard had manipulated me into acting as the off-the-books internal auditor for Oasis Care. He played heavily on my guilt and sense of duty, claiming that external corporate auditors would cost the family business far too much money. He constantly manipulated me by saying that blood was the only thing he could truly trust in the cutthroat corporate world. I was a 32-year-old certified forensic accountant who billed elite corporate clients $600 an hour, yet I spent my weekends untangling Richard's chaotic corporate ledgers for absolutely free. But Richard made one catastrophic miscalculation. He thought I was just blindly balancing his books. He assumed I was too desperate for his fatherly approval to actually look closely at the data. He was dead wrong. I saw everything. As the financial records populated my screens, the true rotting nature of the Oasis Care empire laid bare before me. It was not a compassionate healthcare company. It was a highly sophisticated, predatory machine designed exclusively to siphon federal funds. Richard was committing Medicare fraud on a massive, unprecedented scale. I opened the master vendor ledgers and began pulling the billing codes. He was ghost billing the government for physical therapy sessions and specialized treatments that never actually happened. He was systematically upcoding routine checkups as complex emergency interventions to maximize insurance payouts. He was ordering cheap substandard medical supplies from unregulated overseas vendors, but billing the federal government for premium FDA-approved equipment. The elderly residents in his luxury facilities were secretly being denied basic quality care, sleeping on thin mattresses, and eating low-grade food, while Richard pocketed tens of millions of dollars in federal subsidies. The money did not just stay in Oasis Care corporate accounts. I executed a custom trace program I had written specifically to follow laundered funds through the banking system. The screen split into dozens of complex transaction pathways. Richard had set up a labyrinth of shell companies to wash the stolen Medicare money before routing it directly into the pockets of his favorite children. I pulled up the financial records for Megan's supposedly booming cosmetic line. Her company had not sold a single profitable unit in over 2 years. Her entire business operation was a massive black hole of debt and failed marketing campaigns. Yet her business bank accounts showed regular massive cash injections categorized as consulting fees from Oasis Care. Richard was taking money meant for the life-saving medication of vulnerable seniors and using it to pay for Megan's lavish product launch parties, her designer wardrobes, and the exorbitant commercial rent on her downtown storefront. I switched the forensic query to target Andre. My brother-in-law was a junior investment director who barely understood basic market principles, yet his personal bank accounts told the story of a Wall Street titan. I tracked the specific routing numbers from the joint savings account my parents had just drained while I was in a coma. The funds moved through a corporate holding account and landed directly at the luxury car dealership. The Porsche was only the beginning of his financial crimes. I dug deeper into the wire transfers and uncovered the escrow documents for the lakefront mansion they had shamelessly bragged about in my hospital room. The hefty down payment consisted entirely of funds illegally diverted from the Oasis Care Employee Pension Fund, a retirement fund Richard fully controlled. Andre was driving a sports car and buying premium real estate with money stolen directly from the very nurses and orderlies who wiped down hospital beds and cared for the elderly. I spent the next 4 hours compiling the digital evidence. Every forged vendor invoice, every fraudulent Medicare billing record, every illegal offshore wire transfer. I cross-referenced the IP addresses, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that Richard and Andre had personally authorized these specific transactions from their home networks. I gathered the certified bank statements that proved my own personal life savings had been stolen while I was incapacitated to fund their luxurious lifestyle. My shattered spine screamed in relentless protest, demanding rest, but the pure adrenaline surging through my veins kept my fingers flying rapidly across the keyboard. I compiled the thousands of documents into highly organized, heavily encrypted dossiers. This was no longer just a routine internal audit. This was a federal indictment wrapped in a digital bow waiting to be delivered. I opened the secure portal for the Internal Revenue Service whistleblower office. I attached Form 211, the official application for award for original information. I was not doing this for the whistleblower bounty, but submitting it through the proper federal channels, guaranteed immediate high-priority attention from the most ruthless financial investigators on the planet. I uploaded the comprehensive ledgers, detailing exactly how Richard had evaded millions in corporate taxes by funneling the Medicare payouts through offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands before bringing the cash back into his domestic shell companies. I organized the files meticulously, highlighting the exact discrepancies between his reported income and his actual laundered revenue. I hit submit. A confirmation code flashed on the screen. The financial guillotine was officially suspended over his head. Next, I accessed the Federal Bureau of Investigation electronic tip line specifically targeting the healthcare fraud unit. I attached the patient care logs alongside the fabricated billing codes. I included the internal emails where Richard explicitly ordered nursing directors to cut fresh food budgets and ration basic medical supplies to boost quarterly profit margins. I highlighted the directives where he instructed staff to withhold necessary physical therapy from elderly patients, while simultaneously billing the government for premium rehabilitation services. I encrypted the entire package and sent it directly to a federal agent I had collaborated with during a previous corporate audit case. I knew his direct, secure line. He would never ignore a dossier of this magnitude, especially one served with impeccable forensic documentation. I watched the progress bar hit 100%. The digital payload was away. The federal government was now actively hunting my father. My encrypted phone vibrated violently against the metal desk, shattering the quiet hum of the server racks. The screen lit up with a relentless barrage of notifications from the family group chat. I picked it up, my thumb hovering over the glass. It was Megan. She was sending messages in rapid-fire succession, completely ignoring the fact that less than 10 hours ago, I was lying in a trauma ward with a shattered spine, barely clinging to life. "Riley, you need to be at our house by 4 o'clock sharp on Saturday," the first text read. "We are throwing a massive celebration for Andre. His investment portfolio just hit record numbers, and he is practically a legend at Dad's company now. I need you to handle the catering prep and serve drinks to the guests. I do not want to spend money hiring professional bartenders when you can just do it for free." A second message popped up immediately before I could even process the sheer audacity of the first. "Make sure you wear a plain black uniform so you blend in with the background. Do not wear that ugly neck brace or limp around. It will completely ruin the aesthetic of my party photos, and I need this event to look flawless for my social media sponsors." I stared at the glowing screen. She wanted her sister, who had just survived a catastrophic car accident and a major spinal surgery, to act as unpaid domestic help at a luxury party funded entirely by stolen money. My mother, Catherine, quickly chimed into the chat. "Listen to your sister, Riley. It is the absolute least you can do to make up for the severe emotional stress you caused us this week with your careless driving. Andre has highly important clients coming. Do not embarrass us by looking sick or complaining about your back. Drink some coffee and put on a smile." Richard added his own commanding text a moment later. "Be there early to set up the premium bar. Family supports family. Do not let me down again." I placed the phone face down on the cold metal desk. They were so utterly disconnected from reality, so completely consumed by their own narcissism, that they actually believed they could treat a bedridden trauma survivor like a disposable servant. They truly believed I would just obey their commands, terrified of losing their approval. I did not type a single word in reply. Silence was the most powerful weapon I had right now. Let them think I was compliant. Let them think I was eagerly preparing to serve them expensive champagne and fetch their appetizers. I turned my attention back to the massive monitors. Sending the federal authorities after them was the long game. The government moved methodically, building airtight cases before kicking down doors and issuing arrest warrants. I needed to inflict immediate, suffocating financial pain. I needed to cut off their oxygen supply right this second. I logged into the primary administrative portal for Oasis Care. As the chief internal auditor, Richard had granted me unrestricted God-tier access to the corporate banking infrastructure. He thought I was just a dutiful, desperate daughter, keeping his dirty secrets safe out of familial loyalty. He never once considered that handing me the digital keys to his entire empire was a fatal mistake. I accessed the automated wire transfer protocols. Every Friday at midnight, Oasis Care executed a series of scheduled, highly classified transfers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars flowed out of the corporate operating accounts and into the personal checking accounts of Megan and Andre, cleverly disguised as consulting fees and marketing retainers. I highlighted every single recurring transfer connected to my sister and my brother-in-law. With 4 keystrokes, I deleted the payment schedules. The cash flow was officially severed. Megan's failing cosmetics company would not receive its weekly bailout to cover her exorbitant commercial rent. Andre would not receive his fraudulent bonus payments to fund his luxury car obsession. By Monday morning, their personal accounts would be running on fumes. But I was far from finished. I navigated to the corporate credit card management system. Richard, Catherine, Megan, and Andre all held black corporate cards with virtually unlimited spending power. They used these cards to fund their extravagant lifestyles, illegally billing designer clothing luxury vacations to Europe, and 5-star dinners as corporate business expenses. I selected their individual card profiles one by one. I changed the status of every single card from active to permanently suspended due to suspected fraudulent activity. If Catherine tried to buy another diamond bracelet tomorrow morning, her card would decline at the register. If Richard tried to pay for a lavish country club dinner to impress his wealthy friends, he would be publicly humiliated by a rejected payment. I then initiated a complex data wipe of my administrative access. I created a ghost protocol that masked my login history, making it look exactly as though the automated banking system had triggered a massive security freeze due to irregular money laundering activities. Richard would not know I was the one who pulled the plug. He would assume the bank's compliance department had finally flagged his illegal operations. He would panic. He would waste precious hours screaming at customer service representatives and corporate bankers, completely unaware that the federal government was already assembling a task force to raid his headquarters. The intense, laser-sharp focus had temporarily masked my physical agony. But as I hit the final execution command, my body brutally reminded me of the severe trauma I had just endured. A violent muscle spasm ripped through my lower back, forcing a sharp, ragged gasp from my throat. I gripped the edge of the reinforced desk, my knuckles turning white, breathing heavily through my nose until the blinding pain subsided to a dull, throbbing ache. The trauma surgeon had warned me about permanent nerve damage if I strained myself. I knew I was pushing my physical limits dangerously far, but the pure adrenaline sustained me. I swallowed another prescribed painkiller dry and leaned back in the ergonomic leather chair, staring at the darkened screens. The trap was fully armed. The financial bleeding was stopped. The federal authorities had their treasure map. The group chat on my phone lit up again, the vibration jarring against the desk. It was Megan again. "Riley, you did not answer. Send me a thumbs-up emoji right now so I know you are coming on Saturday. I need you to pick up 5 bottles of the premium vodka on your way over. Use your own money for it. Consider it a gift to Andre for his success." I watched the screen glow in the dark loft, illuminating the cold smile on my face. I let the screen fade to black without touching it. She wanted premium vodka for her spectacular party. She was going to get a completely different kind of celebration. I leaned back in my chair and pulled up the financial trace on the luxury sports car my family had so generously bought with my life savings. My parents were greedy, but they were also incredibly legally illiterate when it came to modern corporate structuring. When I established my freelance forensic accounting firm years ago, I registered it as an anonymous limited liability company called Apex Data Solutions. To protect my assets from potential legal liabilities in my line of work, I had legally linked the old joint savings account to my overarching corporate entity. It was designated as a subsidiary funding source for my business operations. When Richard and Catherine marched into the bank while I was bleeding out in the trauma ward, they authorized a massive wire transfer to a high-end exotic car dealership downtown. They thought they were simply emptying a personal checking account. They did not bother to read the digital wire receipt. The dealership received a direct corporate transfer from Apex Data Solutions. Because the entire purchase price was funded by my company, the dealership's automated financial software registered my LLC as the primary legal owner and sole lien holder of the vehicle. Andre, in his rush to post photos of his new toy on social media, had blindly signed the registration paperwork that listed him merely as an authorized operator, not the legal owner. He was driving a company car that belonged entirely to me. I accessed the dealership's cloud database using a backdoor access protocol I had developed for auditing retail chains. I downloaded the official electronic title, the bill of sale, and the GPS tracking codes installed in the vehicle's onboard computer. The GPS beacon blinked steadily on my left monitor. It was parked securely in the expansive driveway of the lakefront mansion Andre and Megan had just illegally acquired. The car was sitting right there, a shiny metal monument to their unbelievable audacity. It was time to take my property back. I picked up my encrypted burner phone and dialed a highly specialized asset recovery firm that catered exclusively to corporate banks and luxury dealerships. The phone rang twice before a gruff voice answered. His name was Jax, a veteran recovery agent known for being incredibly fast and absolutely ruthless when it came to repossessing six-figure vehicles from wealthy defaulters. "Jax, I need an immediate high-priority asset recovery," I said, keeping my voice strictly professional. "I have a 2026 Porsche Panamera illegally in the possession of an unauthorized driver. I hold the complete electronic title, the corporate bill of sale, and the live GPS tracking data. I need it secured and impounded tonight." "Send me the files," Jax replied, the sound of a diesel engine rumbling in the background. "If the paperwork clears, my team can move in an hour. It will cost you a premium for an emergency middle-of-the-night extraction. I will pay triple your emergency rate if you have that vehicle hooked up and dragged off the property by exactly 3 o'clock in the morning," I countered. "I want it done loud, and I want it done legally." "Consider it gone," Jack said. I forwarded the encrypted dossier containing the proof of ownership and the live location data. Within 15 minutes, Jax replied with a confirmation code. The asset recovery truck was dispatched. I leaned back and pulled up the live satellite feed of their neighborhood. I watched the small digital blip representing the tow truck moving steadily through the quiet, affluent suburban streets of Chicago. My spine was still sending waves of fiery pain through my back, but the adrenaline flowing through my veins acted as the ultimate anesthetic. I was a puppet master, pulling the invisible strings of their destruction, and they were completely oblivious, sleeping soundly in a house bought with stolen money. At exactly 2:45 in the morning, the heavy recovery truck breached the perimeter of their exclusive gated community. By 2:55, the truck was backing silently into the long manicured driveway of the lakefront mansion. I accessed the Porsche's internal computer system remotely. With a single keystroke, I bypassed the factory security settings and rolled down all 4 windows of the sports car to make the repo team's job completely effortless. At precisely 3 o'clock in the morning, I hit another command on my keyboard. I triggered the Porsche's anti-theft panic alarm. The piercing, deafening shriek of the high-decibel siren shattered the dead silence of the wealthy neighborhood. The headlights and taillights flashed violently in the dark. On my monitor, I watched the real-time audio feed spike into the red zone. The noise was absolutely relentless, echoing across the quiet lake and instantly waking up every single millionaire within a half-mile radius. From my desk in the dark loft, I could perfectly envision the utter chaos erupting at the mansion. The front doors of the house flew open. Andre burst onto the driveway wearing silk designer pajamas, waving his arms frantically. He was screaming at the top of his lungs, demanding to know what was happening to his pristine new car. Megan rushed out right behind him, wrapping a velvet robe around herself, shrieking in absolute horror as the bright amber strobe lights of the heavy-duty tow truck illuminated their perfectly manicured lawn. Jax and his professional recovery team did not hesitate. They did not argue. They moved with terrifying mechanical precision. Within 30 seconds, the hydraulic lift was secured under the Porsche's front axles. The car was lifted off the expensive paver stones, the alarm still screaming wildly into the freezing night air. Andre sprinted down the driveway, cursing aggressively and threatening to call the police. He puffed out his chest, throwing his weight around, screaming that he was an elite investment director and that they were making a massive mistake. He demanded they unhook his car immediately. Jax calmly stepped out of the driver's side door. He was a massive, intimidating man who dealt with furious, entitled rich people for a living. He did not flinch. He did not raise his voice. He simply shoved a thick manila envelope directly into Andre's chest. Official corporate seizure, Jack stated loudly over the blaring car alarm. The vehicle belongs to Apex Data Solutions, LLC. You are an unauthorized operator in possession of stolen corporate property. If you have a problem, take it up with the lien holder. Now step back from the commercial vehicle, or I will have you arrested for interfering with a legal recovery operation. Andre froze. The sheer confidence of the repo agent and the heavy stack of legal documents in his hands completely deflated his aggressive posturing. He looked down at the paperwork, his eyes scanning the corporate ownership seals. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He did not own the car. He never owned the car. Megan grabbed Andre's arm, sobbing hysterically as neighbors began stepping out onto their porches, turning on their porch lights to watch the humiliating spectacle unfold. The wealthy, judgmental elite of Chicago were witnessing the golden couple being stripped of their luxury status in the middle of the night. Jax climbed back into the massive tow truck, threw the engine into gear, and drove away without a second glance. The Porsche was dragged mercilessly down the street, its alarm still wailing as it disappeared into the dark. Sitting in my secure loft miles away, I watched the GPS blip of the car move rapidly away from the mansion. I closed the tracking window and allowed myself a genuine, satisfied smile. The first piece of their stolen empire had just been repossessed. By sunrise, the rest of their world would begin to burn. Sunrise hit the Chicago skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across my loft. My spine was a continuous column of searing heat, but I refused to take my eyes off the center monitor. The digital clock in the corner of my screen ticked over to 9 o'clock in the morning. It was exactly time for my sister's highly anticipated, heavily funded public debut. I opened a private browser window and navigated to Megan's social media page. The live video feed buffered for a split second before exploding onto my screen in a chaotic blur of bright pink velvet, glowing neon signs, and pulsing pop music. Megan was standing in the center of her brand new, ridiculously overpriced flagship cosmetics store located right on Oak Street, one of the most expensive commercial real estate districts in the entire city. She was wearing a custom-tailored designer pantsuit, holding her phone on a stabilizing gimbal, and beaming a bright, entirely fake smile to her 500,000 followers. "Welcome to the grand opening of my absolute dream!" Megan squealed into the microphone, flipping her hair perfectly over her shoulder. "I have been working so incredibly hard for this moment. Being a self-made female founder is all about the hustle, guys. I built this brand from the ground up, and today you get to shop the exclusive new collection right here in my gorgeous new boutique." I watched the viewer count in the top corner of the screen skyrocket past 50,000 people. Megan spun the camera around to show off the store. It was a monument to absolute vanity. Floor-to-ceiling mirrors lined the walls, reflecting hundreds of cheap, poorly formulated lip glosses and eyeshadow palettes that had been manufactured in unregulated overseas factories. Richard had poured hundreds of thousands of stolen Medicare dollars into making this space look like a high-end luxury paradise. But Megan was fundamentally unaware of one critical, devastating fact. She was standing in my building. 8 months ago, I had used the legitimate profits from my forensic accounting firm to acquire a highly lucrative commercial real estate portfolio through a blind trust called Obsidian Property Management. When Richard tasked his real estate brokers with finding the absolute perfect high-traffic location for his golden child's vanity project, they blindly signed a commercial lease with my trust. They had no idea they were negotiating with me. I had specifically instructed my corporate attorneys to draft the most ruthless, unforgiving commercial lease allowed under Illinois state law. The contract included a strict immediate forfeiture clause. If a single rent payment bounced, or if the funding source was flagged for fraudulent activity, the landlord held the legal right to execute an emergency commercial lockout without a standard 30-day grace period. When I permanently suspended the Oasis Care corporate credit cards and froze their automated wire transfers at midnight, Megan's massive monthly commercial rent payment violently bounced. The bank flagged the transaction as unauthorized. My trap snapped shut with devastating legal precision. On the live feed, Megan was picking up a sparkling pink lipstick tube, practically shoving it into the camera lens. "You guys are going to absolutely die when you see the pigment on this," she boasted, her voice echoing in the large space. "It is a premium luxury formula that I personally developed." Suddenly, the heavy glass doors of the boutique swung open with a loud, aggressive crash. The bright morning sunlight poured into the pink room, followed immediately by three large figures. I leaned forward in my ergonomic chair, a cold smile spreading across my face. The man leading the charge was Mr. Gallagher, my lead commercial real estate attorney. He was flanked by two uniformed Cook County sheriffs, their badges glinting under the store's expensive chandelier lighting. Behind them, a crew of 4 men wearing heavy-duty work boots and carrying massive industrial garbage bags marched into the pristine boutique. Megan lowered her phone slightly, her fake smile faltering as she stared at the intruders. "Excuse me?" she said, her voice dripping with extreme annoyance. "We are not open to the public yet. This is a private press event. You need to leave immediately." Mr. Gallagher did not stop walking until he was standing directly in front of her. He was a tall, imposing man who specialized in crushing corporate tenants. He did not care about her ring light or her thousands of viewers. He pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his leather briefcase and shoved them aggressively onto the pink velvet display counter. "Megan Anderson," Mr. Gallagher announced, his booming voice echoing crystal clear through the live audio feed. "I am the legal representative for Obsidian Property Management. Your commercial lease is officially terminated effective immediately due to insufficient funds, breach of contract, and suspected fraudulent banking activity. You are currently trespassing on private property." Megan froze. Her eyes darted from the legal documents to the uniformed sheriff standing right behind the lawyer. She instinctively kept her phone raised, broadcasting her own humiliation in high definition to a rapidly growing audience. The viewer count shot past 80,000. "What are you talking about?" Megan shrieked, her carefully cultivated influencer persona completely shattering. "My father is the CEO of Oasis Care. Our rent is automatically paid through a corporate account. You people are making a massive mistake. I will literally sue you for ruining my grand opening." "Your corporate accounts are frozen," Mr. Gallagher stated coldly, tapping a manicured finger against the eviction notice. "The payment bounced at midnight. Per the strict terms of your commercial lease agreement, the landlord has executed an emergency lockout order. You have exactly 10 minutes to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises. Everything else is being seized to cover your outstanding debts." "No!" Megan screamed, her voice cracking with pure panic. "This is my store. You cannot do this to me." She backed away as the moving crew completely ignored her and immediately began dismantling her precious displays. One of the workers grabbed a heavy industrial garbage bag and casually swept an entire shelf of her supposedly premium cosmetic palettes into it. The cheap plastic compacts shattered loudly against each other as they hit the bottom of the bag. Another worker grabbed a stepladder and physically unplugged her massive glowing neon logo from the wall. The bright pink lighting died instantly, plunging half the store into harsh, unflattering shadows. "Stop it!" Megan sobbed frantically, dropping her professional gimbal and holding her phone with a shaking hand. She turned the camera toward the sheriffs, completely losing her mind. "Arrest them! They are stealing my inventory. This is illegal." "Ma'am, step back," one of the sheriffs warned, placing his hand firmly on his utility belt. "This is a lawful commercial eviction. The property owner has the legal right to secure the premises and seize assets for unpaid rent. If you interfere with the recovery team, you will be arrested for trespassing and obstruction." The live comment section on the right side of my monitor was moving so incredibly fast it was an absolute blur of text. Did her rent check bounce? I thought she was a self-made millionaire. OMG, they are throwing her makeup in trash bags. This is the most embarrassing thing I have ever watched. Fake rich girl getting exposed live. Megan was hyperventilating now, completely hysterical, as she watched her vanity project being torn apart piece by piece. She fumbled with her phone, minimizing her streaming app, but failing to actually end the live broadcast. The camera stared up at the ceiling, picking up every single frantic, desperate word she yelled. I am calling my dad, Megan cried out frantically, dialing her phone. He is going to buy this entire building and fire all of you. The phone rang loudly on speaker mode. It went straight to voicemail. Richard was undoubtedly currently screaming at banking executives trying to figure out why his entire fraudulent empire was suddenly hemorrhaging cash. Megan let out a frustrated, guttural scream and dialed another number. Andre, pick up the phone, she yelled the second the line connected. Andre, you need to get down to Oak Street right this second. These crazy people are trying to evict me. Dad's corporate card must be broken. Call the bank and fix it. The audio from Andre's side of the call blasted through the live feed. He was not the smooth, arrogant investment director he pretended to be. He sounded completely unhinged, his breathing ragged and heavy. I cannot fix anything, Andre roared through the speaker, his voice echoing in the empty, half-dismantled boutique. My car is gone, Megan. The Porsche is completely gone. What do you mean it is gone? Megan shrieked back, stomping her expensive designer heel against the hardwood floor. Tell security to find it. I am being thrown out on the street. It was repossessed! Andre screamed, his voice cracking with pure terror. Some massive guy shoved a corporate lien in my face at 3 a.m. and dragged the car away while the whole neighborhood watched. The bank accounts are frozen, Megan. Every single card is declining. I cannot even log into the investment portal. We have absolutely nothing. The comment section on the live stream absolutely exploded. 50,000 viewers had just heard her husband admit on a live public broadcast that his luxury sports car was repossessed in the middle of the night and their bank accounts were empty. The illusion of their massive wealth, their perfect elite lifestyle, and their arrogant superiority was publicly executed in real time. Time is up, Mr. Gallagher announced firmly. He gestured to the heavy glass doors leading out to the busy Chicago sidewalk. Please exit the building immediately. Megan burst into ugly, heaving sobs. She grabbed her expensive designer handbag from the counter, the very same handbag bought with stolen Medicare funds, and stumbled blindly toward the exit. She was crying so hard she could barely see straight. The camera swung wildly, capturing brief, chaotic glimpses of the moving crew, hauling heavy black trash bags filled with her worthless makeup out to the curb. She burst out onto the busy morning sidewalk, the harsh sunlight hitting her tear-streaked face. A crowd of pedestrians had already gathered outside the storefront, recording the spectacular meltdown on their own phones. Megan stood on the concrete, clutching her phone to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably, as a construction worker stepped out of the boutique and firmly locked the heavy glass doors shut behind her. A bright orange eviction notice was slapped directly over the center of the glass. I reached forward and hit the record button on my screen, archiving the entire spectacular broadcast before her public relations team could inevitably scramble to scrub it from the internet. I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep, steadying breath. My shattered spine sent a fresh wave of agony radiating down my legs, but the pain was completely eclipsed by the profound, overwhelming sense of justice. Megan and Andre were stripped of their stolen armor. Their reputation was permanently destroyed. They were standing naked in the freezing reality of consequence. But the financial bleeding was only just beginning. Andre still thought he was an investment director. He still thought he had a job to go back to. He had no idea that the real nightmare was waiting for him at the corporate office. I switched my primary monitor to the Oasis Care investment portfolio dashboard. It was time to deal with the fraudulent husband. I pulled my hands away from the keyboard as my personal cell phone began to vibrate violently across the desk. The caller ID flashed Richard in bold red letters. It took less than 10 minutes for Megan to run crying to our father. I took a slow, agonizing breath, adjusting the rigid medical brace tightly wrapping my torso, and answered the call. I did not say hello. I simply pressed the phone to my ear and listened. "What the hell are you doing?" Richard screamed into the receiver. His voice echoed so loudly I had to pull the phone an inch away from my ear. Megan just called me having a complete mental breakdown on the sidewalk. Her lawyer checked the LLC registration for that building. Obsidian Property Management. That is your blind trust. You own that commercial building. Did you just evict your own sister on a live public broadcast? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the flashing green lights of my servers. I executed a standard commercial eviction for non-payment of rent. I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Her account bounced a $90,000 payment at midnight. Business is business. Business, Richard bellowed, slamming his fist against something heavy on his end of the line. Are you out of your mind? You are betraying your own family. You are destroying your sister's entire career over a simple banking error. Turn those moving trucks around right now and let her back inside. Fix the corporate accounts immediately. I do not know what glitch you caused in the system, but my black card just declined at the bank and Andre's car was towed. Fix it now. I let his frantic demands hang in the dead air for a long moment. I wanted him to feel the absolute silence. I wanted him to realize that his commands held absolutely no power over me anymore. I cannot do that, I said smoothly. You taught me everything I know about financial management. You taught me to save money and cut off useless investments. I cannot provide free premium commercial real estate to tenants who have absolutely zero capacity to pay their debts. You need to be realistic about this, Dad. I threw his exact words back into his face. The very same words he used when he decided my spinal surgery was too expensive to cover. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. For a split second, the arrogant billionaire actually faltered. You listen to me, you ungrateful brat! Catherine's shrill voice suddenly pierced through the speaker. She had snatched the phone from Richard. She was hysterical. Your sister is sitting on a public curb crying her eyes out. Her entire inventory is sitting in trash bags. Do you have any idea how much embarrassment you have caused this family today? How dare you attack us like this after everything we have provided for you? Provided for me, I asked, a cold laugh escaping my lips. You mean like the joint savings account you drained 2 days ago while I was suffocating on a ventilator? You stole my life savings to buy a sports car for a man who does not even know how to balance a basic checkbook. That was family money, Catherine shrieked defensively. We were entitled to it. You were practically dead anyway. You are just acting out of pure spite. I am acting out of forensic precision, I corrected her. And by the way, I hope Andre enjoyed his brief joyride. I bought that Porsche under my corporate entity. It was my asset, so I simply repossessed it. Consider it a lesson in reading the fine print on a bill of sale. Richard snatched the phone back. He was breathing heavily, the realization slowly dawning on him that this was not a temporary tantrum. This was a highly calculated, devastating financial siege. Riley, I am ordering you to stop this right now, Richard demanded, his voice dropping an octave into a dark, threatening growl. You are the internal auditor for Oasis Care. You work for me. You will log into the main administrative portal and restore my corporate access, or I swear to God I will ruin you. I will tie you up in litigation for the rest of your miserable life. I smiled at my reflection in the dark monitor. I do not work for you anymore, Richard. You terminated my unpaid employment contract 2 days ago in the intensive care unit. When you signed that Do Not Resuscitate order to save yourself a few bucks, you severed every single tie we ever had. You liquidated my worth as your daughter. Now I am liquidating yours. You are crazy, Richard stammered. The raw fear was finally bleeding through his aggressive facade. You cannot do this to us. I already did, I stated clearly. Good luck figuring out how to pay for Megan's moving trucks with frozen bank accounts. I highly suggest you check your investment portfolios next. Have a great weekend. I ended the call and instantly blocked his number. I dropped the burner phone onto the desk. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the massive surge of adrenaline crashing through my exhausted, battered body. Every nerve ending in my spine was screaming in protest, punishing me for sitting upright for so many hours. But I could not stop now. The momentum was entirely on my side. I had Richard and Catherine running around in blind panic, utterly confused, and desperately trying to plug the holes in their sinking ship. They thought the eviction and the repossessed car were the worst things that could possibly happen to them today. They thought this was just a bitter family feud over money and disrespect. They had absolutely no concept of the catastrophic avalanche I had just triggered. They were so focused on Megan crying on the sidewalk and the declined credit cards that they were completely ignoring the massive corporate infrastructure crumbling directly beneath their feet. I turned my full, undivided attention back to the third monitor. The Oasis Care investment portfolio dashboard was open, displaying the real-time financial health of my father's empire and, more importantly, Andre's entire career. Andre was parading around Chicago as an elite investment director, but his entire strategy was built on a dangerous, highly leveraged house of cards. He used the stolen Medicare funds to secure massive institutional loans, aggressively gambling millions of dollars on high-risk stock options. He looked like a genius when the market was up, but his entire margin account was backed by one specific vital piece of collateral. My collateral. Years ago, when Andre made his first series of disastrously bad investments and nearly bankrupted a subsidiary branch of Oasis Care, Richard had secretly forced me to pledge my own independent, highly profitable corporate bonds as a silent guarantee to keep the institutional brokers from liquidating Andre's positions. It was a temporary fix that Richard forced me into under the guise of protecting the family name. Because my corporate bonds were pristine and incredibly valuable, the brokers allowed Andre to keep gambling with borrowed money. Andre's entire current portfolio, worth tens of millions in leveraged trades, was fundamentally tied to my personal financial signature. If I pulled my collateral out of the brokerage system, his accounts would instantly violate federal margin requirements. The institutional brokers would not call to ask politely. They would execute an automatic, ruthless liquidation of every single asset Andre managed to cover their massive exposure. I navigated to the secure institutional trading portal. I bypassed the standard dual authentication using the administrative override tokens I had established years prior. I located the specific collateral pledge agreements linking Apex Data Solutions to Andre's high-risk margin accounts. My eyes scanned the flashing red and green numbers of the open market. Andre was currently heavily overleveraged on several volatile tech startups, desperately hoping for a massive payout by the end of the fiscal quarter. He was about to get a very different kind of payout. I moved my mouse over the digital revocation forms. My back throbbed violently, a sharp reminder of the hospital bed where they had left me to die. I took a deep, shaky breath, channeling every ounce of that physical agony into pure, unadulterated focus. I clicked the primary execution button, formally and legally withdrawing my entire collateral pledge from the Oasis Care investment network. The system hesitated for a fraction of a second, processing the massive withdrawal of guaranteed funds. Then the screen refreshed. The status of Andre's entire multi-million-dollar investment portfolio instantly flipped from active to critical margin violation. The automated algorithms of the institutional brokerage firms detected the sudden catastrophic lack of collateral. There was zero hesitation from the banks. The system began flashing aggressive red warning banners across my screen. An automated margin call was officially issued. Andre had exactly zero liquid capital to cover the massive shortfall because I had already frozen the corporate accounts and halted the stolen Medicare cash flow. He was completely trapped in a financial vice grip. I watched the live trading data as the institutional brokers forcefully seized control of his accounts. They began rapidly liquidating his positions at market price, selling off massive chunks of Oasis Care assets at a staggering loss just to recoup their borrowed money. Millions of dollars of my father's fraudulent empire were evaporating into thin air with every passing second. Andre was about to walk into the Oasis Care corporate headquarters, demanding answers about his repossessed Porsche and his frozen debit cards. Instead, he was going to walk directly into a financial apocalypse. The golden son-in-law was about to become the man who single-handedly lost tens of millions of dollars before his morning coffee. I tracked his digital footprint the moment his keycard swiped at the front entrance of the Oasis Care corporate headquarters. Through my remote access to the building's internal security camera network, I watched Andre storm through the pristine glass lobby. He was no longer the arrogant, perfectly composed executive who had sneered at me in the intensive care unit. He had been forced to take a standard rideshare to work after his humiliating late-night eviction from the Porsche. His custom-tailored suit was wrinkled, His tie was crooked, and he was sweating profusely despite the heavy air conditioning blasting through the building. He marched past his executive assistant without a single word of greeting, slammed his office door shut, and threw his leather briefcase across the room. He was furious, completely blinded by his own ego, and the sheer embarrassment of Megan weeping on the public sidewalk just an hour prior. He needed cash immediately to fix this monumental public relations disaster. He needed to secure a new commercial space for his wife before the influencer gossip blogs completely destroyed her brand. He needed to buy a replacement luxury vehicle in pure cash to prove to his wealthy neighbors that the midnight repossession was just a ridiculous clerical error. To do all of that, he needed liquidity. He needed to raid the corporate investment funds before Richard arrived at the office and started asking uncomfortable questions about the frozen credit cards. I mirrored his desktop screen onto my secondary monitor. I watched his cursor move aggressively across the screen as he booted up the secure trading terminal. He bypassed the standard corporate oversight protocols, abusing the administrative privileges Richard had foolishly granted him. He navigated straight to the primary liquidity pool, fully intending to authorize a quiet, unapproved wire transfer of $2 million directly into a private offshore holding account. He typed in the transfer amount. He hit execute. The screen instantly flashed a harsh, glaring red error message. Transaction denied. Account frozen. Through the security camera feed, I watched Andre slam his fist down on his desk. He thought it was a simple banking glitch. He thought the system was just experiencing a temporary delay. He violently refreshed the page and tried to force the transfer through a secondary routing channel. Transaction denied. Critical margin violation. Andre froze. He leaned closer to the monitor, the color rapidly draining from his face. He navigated away from the wire transfer portal and opened his master portfolio dashboard. He fully expected to see his highly leveraged, aggressive stock positions sitting comfortably in the green. He expected to see the massive safety net of my corporate collateral holding his risky bets securely in place. Instead, he stared at a financial bloodbath. The numbers on his screen were locked in a terrifying downward spiral. The institutional brokers had not just frozen his account. They were actively slaughtering it. Because I had legally revoked the Apex Data Solutions collateral pledge, Andre was suddenly violating federal margin regulations to the tune of $40 million. The banks did not waste time calling to ask for a deposit. They triggered an automated ruthless liquidation sequence to protect their own exposure. I watched his cursor shake violently as he tried to cancel the sell orders. He clicked frantically, desperately, trying to manually override the system. It was completely useless. He was locked out of his own terminal. He had absolutely zero trading authority. He was forced to sit there in his expensive ergonomic chair and watch as the automated brokerage algorithms dumped massive blocks of Oasis Care assets onto the open market at rock-bottom prices. Every single high-risk tech stock he had purchased with borrowed money was sold off at a catastrophic loss. The numbers plummeted in real time. Minus 10 million, minus 25 million, minus 40 million. The entire portfolio was evaporating before his eyes. The stolen Medicare funds, the illegal pension diversions, the highly leveraged corporate debt, it was all being burned to the ground to cover the margin call. Andre grabbed his desk phone and furiously dialed his primary institutional broker. I intercepted the audio feed through the corporate network, listening to the pure panic bleeding into his voice. "Listen to me," Andre screamed the second the line connected. "You need to halt the liquidation algorithms right this second. This is a massive mistake. I am the director of investments for Oasis Care. We have the collateral. Just refresh the pledge agreements. Stop selling my positions." The broker on the other end of the line was completely devoid of sympathy. The voice was cold, corporate, and absolute. "There is no mistake, sir. The guarantor legally revoked the collateral pledge at exactly 8:05 this morning. Your account was severely over-leveraged and in critical violation of margin limits. The liquidation is standard protocol to cover the institutional deficit. We are closing your positions to protect the firm." "You do not understand," Andre yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. You are wiping out the entire operating fund. My father-in-law is going to kill me. Give me 24 hours to wire fresh capital. I can get the cash. The broker did not hesitate. Your corporate accounts are currently flagged for irregular activity and suspicious routing. We cannot accept incoming wire transfers from Oasis Care at this time. The liquidation sequence is irreversible. Your portfolio balance is currently negative $12 million, and you are personally liable for the remaining deficit. Have your legal counsel contact our compliance department. The broker hung up the phone. Andre dropped the receiver. It clattered loudly against his desk. He stared blindly at the monitors, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his failure. He had always believed he was a financial prodigy. He strutted around family dinners, bragging about his aggressive trading strategies and his brilliant market instincts. He never realized that his entire career was just a heavily subsidized illusion. He was playing a high-stakes game with cheat codes backed entirely by my pristine financial reputation. The second I removed my safety net, he was exposed as a reckless, incompetent amateur who had just destroyed a healthcare empire in less than an hour. I adjusted my back brace, ignoring the sharp stabbing pain radiating down my spine. The trap was fully closed, but the grand finale was just arriving at the front door. I switched my attention back to the high-definition security cameras monitoring the main lobby of the Oasis Care headquarters. The corporate building featured expansive glass doors and a sprawling marble atrium designed to intimidate visitors and project an image of absolute medical authority. 3 unmarked black government SUVs pulled aggressively into the circular driveway, completely ignoring the valet parking signs. The doors flew open simultaneously. A dozen agents wearing dark windbreakers stepped out onto the pavement. The bright yellow letters across their backs were clearly visible through the high-definition camera feed. FBI. They were flanked by another team of agents carrying heavy tactical briefcases and wearing credentials from the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Internal Revenue Service. My anonymous whistleblower dossiers had not just raised a red flag. They had triggered a full-scale multi-agency federal raid. The agents did not politely ask the receptionist for an appointment. They moved with swift, terrifying military precision. They bypassed the security turnstiles, flashed federal warrants at the stunned security guards, and immediately began locking down the building. I watched as agents secured the elevators, blocking anyone from entering or leaving the premises. Another team marched directly into the IT department, physically disconnecting the primary servers to preserve digital evidence of the Medicare fraud before Richard could attempt a remote wipe. Up in his executive suite, Andre was still staring at the negative balances on his trading dashboard, completely unaware of the federal swarm ascending the building. He was hyperventilating, his hands gripping the edge of his desk so hard his knuckles were stark white. He finally snapped out of his paralysis and lunged for his cell phone. I monitored the cellular network traffic and intercepted the call the moment it connected. He was calling Richard. "Dad," Andre gasped. He was practically sobbing into the receiver. "Dad, you need to get to the office right now. Something is horribly wrong. The brokers liquidated everything. The margin call triggered an automated sell-off. The collateral is gone." "What the hell are you talking about?" Richard roared through the phone. "I am currently dealing with the bank, freezing all of my accounts, and Megan crying about a commercial eviction." "What do you mean the collateral is gone? Did you touch the reserve funds?" "I did not touch anything," Andre pleaded, pacing frantically around his office. "The system says the guarantor revoked the pledge. The entire investment portfolio evaporated. We are completely wiped out. We owe the banks $12 million in deficit." Richard fell dead silent on the other end of the line. For a man who obsessed over every single penny, the concept of losing tens of millions of dollars in a matter of minutes was incomprehensible. "Who revoked the pledge?" Richard finally demanded, his voice dropping into a lethal, trembling whisper. "Who authorized that withdrawal?" Before Andre could answer, the heavy wooden door to his executive office was violently kicked open. Through the security camera, I watched as 4 federal agents flooded into the room. They did not knock. They did not introduce themselves. They moved with absolute authority, surrounding his desk in seconds. One of the agents slammed a heavy federal search warrant directly onto the keyboard, blocking Andre's view of his decimated portfolio. "Sir, step away from the computer and put the phone down immediately," the lead agent commanded. Andre froze, the phone still pressed to his ear. He looked absolutely terrified, his eyes darting frantically between the badges on their belts and the grim expressions on their faces. Andre Richards shouted through the phone, the audio picking up clearly on my intercepted feed. "Andre, what is that noise? Who is in the room with you?" Andre slowly lowered the phone from his ear, his hand shaking violently. He stared at the federal agents, his arrogant facade completely shattered. He brought the phone back to his mouth, his voice breaking into a high, panicked whisper. Dad Andre choked out tears of pure terror, finally spilling down his cheeks. The company accounts evaporated. The Securities and Exchange Commission just walked into the lobby. The line went dead. The federal raid was fully underway. I spent the next 12 hours sitting in my ergonomic chair, monitoring the news scanners and secure police frequencies. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and the Internal Revenue Service completely dismantled the Oasis Care headquarters. They seized every server, boxed up every physical ledger, and escorted dozens of executives out of the building. Richard and Andre were detained, interrogated by federal prosecutors for hours, and eventually released late that evening, pending formal federal indictment. They were stripped of their passports and their corporate access, but they were still walking the streets like wounded, desperate animals. I was reviewing the asset forfeiture logs when the heavy service elevator in my building violently clanked into gear. It was past midnight. I had explicitly locked the ground floor access panel. A heavy thud echoed against my reinforced steel door. Someone was trying to breach the electronic deadbolt. I calmly reached under my desk and triggered the silent security recording system, syncing the high-definition video and audio feeds directly to my offshore cloud server. A second, much louder crash reverberated through the loft. The reinforced hinges groaned. Richard had always bragged about having corrupt contacts in the city. He must have used the very last of his hidden emergency cash to bribe a private investigator to find my secure location, and then paid off the building management to override the security protocols. The door finally gave way with a splintering crack slamming aggressively against the exposed brick wall. They poured into my sanctuary like a pack of cornered rabid wolves. Richard, Catherine, Megan, and Andre. They looked absolutely nothing like the pristine, arrogant billionaires who had mocked my shattered body in the intensive care unit just 48 hours ago. Richard was missing his silk tie, his expensive suit jacket stained with sweat and wrinkled from the interrogation room. Catherine's designer makeup was heavily smeared down her cheeks, making her look incredibly haggard. Megan was still wearing the exact same pink pantsuit from her humiliating public eviction, clutching her empty luxury handbag to her chest like a life preserver. Andre looked completely unhinged. His eyes were bloodshot, his breathing ragged, and his fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. I did not cower. I did not hit the panic button. I reached for the medical crutches resting against my standing desk. Searing, blinding pain shot through my fused spine as I forced myself to stand upright. My legs trembled under my own weight, but I locked my knees and stood tall, facing the home invaders with absolute icy composure. Andre lunged forward aggressively, closing the distance between us until he was standing just inches away. He pointed his shaking finger directly at my face, completely ignoring the fact that I was severely injured and heavily braced. "Are you trying to ruin my entire career?" Andre screamed, his voice cracking with pure, desperate rage. "Do you have any idea what you did today? The feds interrogated me for 6 hours. The brokerage firms are holding me personally liable for a $12 million deficit because you pulled the collateral. You are a selfish, vindictive maniac. Root ngeke don tokao IRS lie. Log into that portal right now and withdraw that IRS report. Tell them you fabricated the ledgers. Tell them you made a mistake." I looked at his shaking finger, then up into his bloodshot eyes. I let out a harsh, sharp laugh that echoed off the high ceilings of my loft. "Your career?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. "You never had a career, Andre. You were a glorified gambler playing roulette with stolen Medicare funds. You bought a lakefront mansion with money meant for the physical therapy of dying seniors. And for the record, the Internal Revenue Service does not just drop a massive federal fraud investigation because a whistleblower changes her mind. The federal government has your hard drives. They have your routing numbers. You are not going back to Wall Street. You are going to federal prison. Megan burst into loud theatrical sobs, stepping out from behind her husband. She pointed at my computer screens. You owe me a new store, Riley. You humiliated me in front of 80,000 people. My sponsors dropped me. You ruined my life. You have to give me the money to rebuild my brand. You sold toxic, unregulated sludge to teenagers while billing it as luxury makeup, I replied without missing a beat. You were evicted because you are a fraud. Your entire existence was subsidized by sick people. You are not getting a single dime from me. Catherine shoved past Megan and Andre, her face twisting into a mask of pure manipulative agony. She fell to her knees in the middle of my loft, grabbing the bottom of my aluminum medical crutches. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing large fake tears to stream down her face. Riley, please, Catherine wailed, her voice hitting a sickeningly sweet pleading register. Con mun yit bo me sao? Chumtala jading, how can you do this to us? We raised you. We put a roof over your head. You cannot send your father and your brother-in-law to jail. We can forgive you for this misunderstanding. We can go back to how things were. You just have to fix this. I stared down at the woman who had given birth to me. The woman who had proudly bragged about stealing my life savings to buy a sports car just 2 days ago. I kicked my crutch forward, forcing her to let go of the frame. Do not ever use the word family with me again, I stated, my voice dropping to a lethal, dangerous whisper. You did not come here because you love me. You came here because your black card stopped working. You came here because you are terrified of losing your country club memberships and your designer wardrobes. You stole my money while I was suffocating on a ventilator. You are not a mother, Catherine. You are a parasite. Richard pushed his wife aside. He stepped right into my personal space, attempting to use his massive physical presence to intimidate me. It was the exact same bullying tactic he used to crush rival executives in corporate boardrooms. He glared down at me, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. He raised his hand, pointing a thick finger right between my eyes. I am your father! Richard roared, the veins bulging in his neck. I built a massive multi-million-dollar empire from the ground up to provide for this family. I gave you everything. You are going to call your contacts at the FBI right now. You are going to tell them that you acted alone, that you embezzled the funds yourself, and that you filed a false report out of spite. You will take the fall for this, Riley. You will do it, or I will make sure you never work in the financial sector again. I will bury you in civil lawsuits until you are begging on the street. He was demanding that I become his ultimate scapegoat. He wanted me to confess to his crimes and go to federal prison so he could maintain his luxurious lifestyle. The absolute audacity was staggering, yet completely aligned with the man he had always been. I held my ground, leaning my weight heavily onto the crutches as my spinal column screamed in agony. I met his furious, bulging eyes without a single trace of fear. I was no longer the desperate daughter seeking his approval. I was the architect of his total destruction. You think you are so smart? Andre yelled, stepping forward again, his chest heaving. You think hiding in this warehouse makes you untouchable? We know you have millions stashed away in these offshore trusts. If you do not fix the margin call, I will personally drag you into court and expose your little anonymous corporate structures. You cannot expose what is entirely legal. Andre, I fired back. My assets are clean. I pay my taxes. I do not run ghost billing schemes on the federal government. My wealth was built on actual labor, not by draining the life savings of vulnerable dementia patients. You are welcome to try and sue me with whatever pocket change you have left after the institutional brokers finish liquidating your entire existence. Megan stomped her foot on the concrete floor, her face red and blotchy from crying. You are just jealous, Riley. You have always been jealous of me because Dad loved me more. You did all this just because you are a bitter, lonely accountant who cannot stand seeing us happy. I am not jealous of a woman who cannot afford her own lifestyle, I stated coldly. You are a financial dependent masking as an entrepreneur. The only reason you were happy is because you were living in a highly funded delusion. Welcome to reality, Megan. The rent is due and Daddy's bank account is permanently closed. Catherine wailed again from the floor, dramatically clutching her chest, as if she were having a heart attack. How can you be so cold, Riley? Where is your compassion? We are facing absolute ruin. My compassion died on that hospital bed, I told her, my voice unwavering. It died the exact moment you told me I was a burden for surviving a car crash. Richard stepped closer, his jaw clenching. He tried a different tactic, lowering his voice into a menacing, calculated tone. Listen to me very carefully, Riley. The federal government does not have a solid case without your testimony. If you refuse to cooperate with them, their entire investigation falls apart. You are going to sign a non-disclosure agreement tonight. I will give you back your savings account. I will even give you a 10% cut of the company. Just shut your mouth and walk away. He was attempting to bribe the whistleblower in front of high-definition recording cameras. He was truly desperate. You do not have 10% to give Richard, I replied, a small, victorious smile finally breaking through my cold facade. You do not have anything left. The empire is gone. The money is gone. The illusion is over. Richard took a step forward. He raised his fist, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unfiltered rage. He looked as though he might actually strike me right there in my own home. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply reached across my desk and tapped the spacebar on my primary keyboard. The large monitor in the center of the room immediately shifted from the flashing financial dashboard to a high-definition video file. It was the security footage I had legally requested and secured from the hospital administration, using my corporate power of attorney protocols before I checked myself out of the trauma ward. The pristine audio of the intensive care unit filled the high ceilings of my industrial loft. The rhythmic, agonizing beep of my own heart monitor echoed through the heavy desktop speakers. Then Richard's voice cut through the clinical silence. It was not the booming, aggressive voice he was using right now. It was chillingly calm. It was calculated. It was entirely devoid of any human empathy. Let her go, we will not pay for the surgery. The recording played loudly and perfectly clear. Richard's cold, calculating voice rang across the room. He was standing next to my broken body on the screen, speaking to the attending trauma surgeon. She is a useless investment now. The recorded version of my father continued. Pull the plug. The sound of his heavy fountain pen scratching across the Do Not Resuscitate order echoed like a gunshot in my apartment. The silence that fell over my loft was absolute. The audio continued to play, the ambient, sterile noise of the hospital room, but nobody standing in front of me dared to breathe. Megan's mouth hung open in shock. For once in her incredibly shallow, self-centered life, she was entirely speechless. Catherine stared at the bright screen, her eyes wide with sheer terror. She was not horrified by the cruelty of the act itself. She was horrified because she realized there was concrete, irrefutable digital proof of their utter depravity. Andre took a slow step backward. He looked at Richard as if he were seeing a monster for the very first time. Andre was a greedy, opportunistic man who married into wealth to fund his luxurious lifestyle, but even he seemed physically sickened by the blatant execution of a daughter for financial gain. He swallowed hard, his dark skin paling as the reality of the situation washed over him. He realized he had tied his entire existence to a man who would gladly let his own flesh and blood die to save a fraction of his bank account. I reached over to the heavy steel filing cabinet next to my desk. I grabbed the massive 500-page binder bound in thick black leather. It was the physical master copy of the forensic audit. Every single fraudulent transaction, every fake Medicare claim, every illegal shell company transfer was printed and indexed inside. I lifted the massive binder with both hands, fighting through the intense, blinding agony in my spine, and slammed it down violently onto the metal desk. The heavy crash made Catherine jump out of her skin. Family. I asked, my voice dropping into a lethal quiet register that forced them to listen to every single syllable. You have the absolute audacity to stand in my home and talk to me about family. Family is stealing $5 million in federal Medicare funds from dying, vulnerable senior citizens, just so you can buy a lakefront mansion and a fleet of luxury sports cars. Family is ghost billing the government for physical therapy that never happened, so your golden child can sell toxic lip gloss on the internet and pretend to be a successful entrepreneur. I pointed directly at the black binder. I covered your tracks for 5 years, Richard. I worked 80-hour weeks scrubbing your filthy, contaminated ledgers. I built the digital firewalls that kept the federal auditors blind. I did it because I was foolish enough to believe in this twisted, toxic concept of loyalty you drilled into my head since I was a child. I protected your fraudulent empire because I thought deep down I was still part of this family. I gripped the aluminum handles of my crutches, forcing myself to stand even taller, despite the searing heat radiating through my fused vertebrae. But that illusion died on the operating table, I stated firmly, locking eyes with the man who sired me. The exact second you signed that Do Not Resuscitate order to save a few $1,000, you did not just pull the plug on my medical care. You pulled the plug on your own immunity. You weighed my life against your bank account, and you chose the money. The blood contract between us was permanently terminated the moment your pen hit that paper. Richard's face twitched. The veins in his forehead were pulsing violently. He opened his mouth to speak, to formulate some kind of corporate spin to find a legal loophole in my logic. There was none. The hospital recording was irrefutable. The financial documents sitting on the desk were undeniable. He was trapped in a prison of his own making, and the architect of his demise was the daughter he deemed too expensive to keep alive. Catherine shook her head in rapid denial. Her hands trembled wildly as she clutched her designer purse to her chest. Riley, you do not understand. We were grieving. The doctor said the chances of a full recovery were so low. We did not want to see you suffer in a hospital bed for the rest of your life. We made a difficult medical decision out of mercy. Mercy, I repeated, letting a harsh, humorless laugh escape my lips. You went from signing my death warrant straight to the bank to drain my life savings. You stole the money I earned to buy Andre a Porsche before my hospital bed was even cold. Do not you dare stand in my house and weaponize the word mercy. You are a parasite, Catherine. You are all parasites feeding off the weak, and I just completely cut off the host. Megan started crying again loudly and dramatically. She pointed a shaking finger at me. You are a monster. You are sending your own father to federal prison over a stupid medical form. You have millions of dollars hidden away in these trusts. You could fix this. You could pay off the institutional brokers and save the company. I looked at my sister with pure, unfiltered pity. Megan, you are 28 years old, and you still believe the world exists merely to fund your delusions. The company is not in debt. The company is a massive, federally indicted crime scene. Even if I wanted to bail you out, which I absolutely do not, the Federal Bureau of Investigation currently has your father's servers in custody. The Securities and Exchange Commission has seized Andre's entire trading portfolio. You cannot buy your way out of a federal fraud charge. Andre groaned loudly, sinking onto a metal stool near the door. He buried his face in his hands, the reality of his impending incarceration finally crushing his massive ego. He was going to lose his luxury watches, his tailored suits, and his freedom. He would be trading his corner office for a federal holding cell. Richard took another aggressive step toward me. His fists were clenched so tightly, his knuckles were completely white. He was a cornered animal stripped of his wealth, his authority, and his pristine public image. He realized that intimidation was the only weapon he had left. You are going to regret this for the rest of your pathetic life, Richard hissed, his voice dripping with pure venom. I am Richard Montgomery. I have defense lawyers on retainer who eat little freelance accountants like you for breakfast. I will tie you up in civil court for decades. I will make sure you are indicted as a co-conspirator. You cooked the books, Riley. You admitted it right here in this room. If I go down, you are coming down with me. I did not break eye contact. I did not back down. I anticipated this exact threat the moment I woke up in the hospital. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a single sheet of heavy watermarked paper. I slid it across the metal desk toward him. Read it, I commanded. Richard snatched the paper from the desk. His eyes darted aggressively across the legal text. It was a formal signed document bearing the official seal of the Department of Justice. It was a comprehensive proffer agreement. I am not going down for your crimes, Richard. I explained calmly, watching the last remaining shreds of his arrogance evaporate into the cold air. I submitted the evidence through the official federal whistleblower program. I provided the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation with a fully documented map of your entire money laundering operation. In exchange for my complete unredacted cooperation and the surrender of the encrypted ledgers, the Department of Justice granted me full unconditional transactional immunity. I am a federally protected witness. You cannot sue me. You cannot drag me into your criminal indictment. I am completely untouchable. Richard stared at the federal document in his hands as if it were a venomous snake. His breath hitched in his throat. The realization that he had been completely outplayed by his own daughter finally broke through his impenetrable ego. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. He had spent his entire life treating me like a disposable asset, an employee he could exploit and discard at his own convenience. He never once considered that I possessed the intelligence, the resourcefulness, and the sheer ruthlessness required to dismantle his entire existence. "You planned this," Catherine whispered, her voice trembling as she backed away from the desk. "You planned to destroy us." I shook my head slowly, gripping my crutches. "I planned to survive, Catherine. I planned to protect myself from a family that viewed my death as a convenient financial windfall. You made your choices when you stood in that hospital room and authorized the termination of my life. I simply responded with the appropriate forensic countermeasures. I audited your loyalty and you failed. And you—" Richard's hand shook violently as he crumpled the Department of Justice proffer agreement into a tight ball and hurled it against the exposed brick wall of my loft. The realization that he could not drag me into a federal prison cell alongside him did not extinguish his rage. It simply poured gasoline on it. His corporate mask completely melted away, leaving behind a frantic, vicious man who realized his entire universe was collapsing in real time. He paced the length of my office like a caged predator. "You think a piece of federal paper makes you invincible?" Richard roared, his voice echoing off the high ceilings with a deafening intensity. "I am your father. I created you. I gave you the very education and the forensic skills you are trying to use against me right now. You think you can just walk away from this with your hands clean? I will sue you in civil court for defamation. I will sue you for corporate espionage, breach of fiduciary duty, and slander." He took another aggressive step forward, kicking the base of my metal desk. "I will hire a legal team so massive and so relentless that they will bury you in litigation for the next 30 years, Richard screamed, spitting his words with pure venom. "I will freeze your hidden trusts. I will completely drain your bank accounts with legal fees. You will not have a single penny left to your name. You will be begging on the streets of Chicago, and I will personally make sure no financial firm in this country ever hires you again." Catherine clamped her hands over her ears, unable to handle the sheer volume of his screaming. She collapsed against the heavy steel doorframe, weeping hysterically as her luxury lifestyle evaporated before her eyes. "Please, Richard, stop yelling!" Catherine wailed, her designer makeup running down her face in dark streaks. She looked at me with wild, desperate eyes. "Riley, tell him you will stop this. Tell him you will give us the money back. We can hire lawyers together. We can fight the government. Just fix the bank accounts." Megan was curled into a tight ball on the floor next to Andre, rocking back and forth in her ruined pink designer pantsuit, muttering endlessly about her destroyed reputation and her canceled brand sponsorships. "My followers are laughing at me," she sobbed uncontrollably. "Everyone saw the eviction. My entire life is ruined." Andre just stared blankly at the wall, his mind completely broken by the impending reality of a federal indictment. He was a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of Wall Street superiority, and now he was nothing more than a broke, unemployed fraud facing serious jail time. He slowly brought his hands up to his face, letting out a long, hollow groan of pure despair. I stood perfectly still, anchored by the heavy desk and my remaining crutch. My spine felt like it was being compressed by a vise of burning iron, but I did not let a single ounce of that physical agony show on my face. I watched Richard rant and rave, threatening me with civil ruin, threatening to destroy a career I had built entirely on my own merits. He was completely delusional. He truly believed he still held a shred of power. He believed his vast fortune, the same fortune currently being seized by federal agents, would somehow magically save him. He was clinging to the arrogant, dangerous assumption that he could outspend the United States government. "Do you hear me, Riley?" Richard bellowed, his chest heaving as he pointed a shaking finger directly at my face. "I am going to destroy you. You are nothing without the Montgomery name. You are a defective, ungrateful child, and I will wipe you off the financial map. You will be left with absolutely nothing." I did not raise my voice to match his frantic screaming. I did not need to. True power does not need to shout. I simply turned my head and looked at the large digital clock glowing on the far wall of my loft. The bright red numbers flipped silently. 6 o'clock in the morning. The federal news embargo had officially lifted. The major networks had been sitting on the exclusive press release from the Department of Justice all night, waiting for the morning broadcast to maximize their viewer ratings. I turned my gaze back to the man who signed my death warrant to save a fraction of his fraudulent wealth. The silence in the room stretched for a long, agonizing moment, broken only by Megan's pathetic sobbing and the heavy, ragged sound of Richard catching his breath. "It is too late for lawsuits, Dad," I said, my voice cutting through the thick tension like a razor blade. Richard stopped panting. He narrowed his eyes, confused by my absolute lack of fear and the eerie calmness in my tone. "What are you talking about?" I reached across the desk and picked up the remote control for the massive media screen mounted on the wall behind me. "I am saying that you cannot sue me with money that no longer exists," I stated coldly. "And you certainly cannot hire a civil defense team from a federal holding cell." I pointed the remote directly at the screen and pressed the power button. "You should really check the morning news. Turn on the TV, Dad. Channel 4. The massive flat screen mounted on the exposed brick wall flickered to life with a sharp electronic hum. The local Chicago morning broadcast immediately filled the room, but the anchor was not discussing the weather or the morning traffic commute. A glaring blood-red breaking news banner spanned the entire bottom third of the screen. The studio anchor stared directly into the camera, his expression completely grave, his voice radiating absolute urgency. "We are interrupting our regular morning programming to bring you a massive developing story out of the downtown financial district," the anchor announced, his voice echoing loudly across my industrial loft. "A highly coordinated multi-agency federal raid is currently underway at the corporate headquarters of Oasis Care, one of the largest luxury assisted living providers in the Midwest." The screen instantly cut from the news desk to live aerial footage captured by a news helicopter. The camera panned over the pristine glass-fronted Oasis Care corporate building. The entire city block was heavily barricaded. Dozens of unmarked black government vehicles and mobile command units surrounded the perimeter. Agents wearing dark windbreakers with bright yellow letters spelling out Federal Bureau of Investigation and Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation were swarming the plaza. Through the high-definition feed, we could clearly see agents carrying out heavy cardboard boxes loaded with physical evidence ledgers and seized computer servers. Richard stood frozen in the center of my loft. All the aggressive color had completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His jaw hung slack. He looked like a man who had just been struck by lightning. The anchor continued delivering the fatal blows with pristine journalistic clarity. "The Department of Justice has just unsealed a sweeping 47-count federal indictment against the senior executive board of Oasis Care. Federal prosecutors allege a staggering multi-million-dollar Medicare fraud conspiracy involving the systematic financial exploitation of vulnerable seniors. Sources inside the investigation confirm that millions in federal subsidies were illegally laundered through offshore shell companies to fund the lavish personal lifestyles of the company leadership." Andre let out a strangled, terrified gasp. He stumbled backward, his knees giving out entirely. He collapsed onto the cold concrete floor, pulling his knees to his chest. He was hyperventilating, drawing in short, ragged breaths, as the reality of his impending doom crashed down upon him. The news anchor was not finished. The broadcast cut to a reporter standing live on the street level directly outside the corporate lobby. "Yes, Tom," the reporter said, holding a microphone as agents marched behind her. "Authorities have confirmed that the primary targets of this federal sweep are the Chief Executive Officer Richard Montgomery and the Director of Investments, who is accused of illegally diverting highly leveraged corporate funds into volatile market positions, resulting in catastrophic institutional losses. Arrest warrants have been officially issued. Both men are currently considered federal fugitives after fleeing their respective residences earlier this morning." Richard slowly turned his head away from the television screen and looked at me. His eyes were wide with a raw, primal terror. The arrogant, untouchable billionaire was completely gone. He was nothing more than a desperate criminal who finally understood that there was absolutely no escape. He opened his mouth to speak, to beg, to offer me anything in the world to make this nightmare stop, but the words died in his throat. A new sound penetrated the thick silence of the loft. It started as a faint, distant wail echoing off the concrete canyons of the Chicago skyline. Within seconds, the sound multiplied, growing exponentially louder, sharper, and infinitely more aggressive. It was the distinct, piercing shriek of multiple police sirens. The noise tore through the early morning air, converging rapidly from different directions. Megan scrambled to the large industrial window, pressing her face against the thick glass. She looked down at the street below and let out a piercing, blood-curdling scream. "They are here!" Megan shrieked, backing away from the window as if the glass itself had burned her. "Dad, they are right outside the building. There are police cars everywhere." The intense flashing red and blue strobe lights of the emergency vehicles pierced through the large windows, casting wild, chaotic shadows across the walls of my loft. I had known they were coming. When Richard and his frantic entourage breached my secure building, they brought their GPS tracking signals right to my doorstep. The federal agents did not have to search hard to find the fugitive executives. They simply pinged the cell phones of the men they were hunting. Heavy, aggressive footsteps thundered up the metal stairwell outside my apartment. The sound of tactical boots hitting the steel grating was absolutely deafening. Federal agents opened the door, a booming, authoritative voice roared from the hallway. "We have a warrant. Open the door immediately." Richard spun around in blind panic. He looked at the shattered steel door of my loft, the very same door he had violently kicked open just an hour ago to threaten my life. There was no running. There was nowhere to hide. Before anyone inside could react, a team of 6 heavily armed federal agents poured through the broken doorway. They moved with terrifying practiced efficiency, flooding the space in a highly coordinated tactical formation. Their weapons were drawn but held at a low ready position. They instantly identified their targets. "Richard Montgomery," the lead agent shouted, stepping directly into my father's personal space. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, healthcare fraud, and money laundering." Richard did not fight back. The fight had been completely beaten out of him by the morning news broadcast. He slowly turned around, placing his trembling hands behind his back. The heavy metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed sharply in the room. It was the sound of an empire officially falling. Another pair of agents converged on Andre, who was still sitting on the floor in a state of absolute catatonic shock. "Get up on your feet, sir," an agent commanded, grabbing Andre by the shoulder and hauling him upward. Andre offered zero resistance. His eyes were completely vacant, staring blankly ahead as his own wrists were forcefully secured behind his back. Megan completely lost her mind. She lunged forward, grabbing wildly at Andre's suit jacket, screaming hysterically at the federal agents. "You cannot take him," Megan sobbed, her voice cracking into a shrill, desperate pitch. "He is my husband. He is an investment director. We did not do anything wrong. This is a massive misunderstanding. Let him go right now." "Ma'am, step back immediately, or you will be charged with interfering with a federal arrest," an agent warned firmly, physically stepping between Megan and her handcuffed husband. He gently but forcefully pushed her back toward the wall. Megan collapsed against the brick, sliding down until she hit the floor, sobbing uncontrollably into her hands. Her entire life of stolen luxury, her fake influencer status, her massive vanity store, it was all permanently destroyed. She was returning to the absolute bottom of the social hierarchy, and she knew it. Catherine could not process the sensory overload. She watched her powerful husband being patted down for weapons. She watched her golden son-in-law being dragged toward the door in chains. She looked at the flashing red and blue lights illuminating the room. She clutched her chest, her breathing becoming incredibly shallow and rapid. Her eyes rolled back into her head. Without making a single sound, Catherine completely lost consciousness, her knees buckling beneath her. She fainted, hitting the cold concrete floor with a heavy, ungraceful thud. Nobody rushed to catch her. Megan was too busy crying over her own ruined life. Richard was being actively read his Miranda rights, his face shoved against the wall. Andre was already being marched out the broken doorway. The lead agent secured Richard's arms and turned to look at me. I was still standing behind my reinforced desk, leaning my weight onto my aluminum crutches. The brace wrapping my shattered spine was highly visible. "Are you the resident of this apartment?" the agent asked, his tone shifting from aggressive command to cautious professionalism. "Are you injured, ma'am? Do you need us to call for medical assistance?" I looked at the federal agent. I looked at Richard, who was craning his neck to glare at me one last time over his shoulder. His eyes were filled with pure, unadulterated hatred, but also the agonizing realization of his total defeat. "I am perfectly fine, officer," I replied, my voice steady, calm, and crystal clear. "I am just a cooperating witness." The suspects broke down my door to threaten me regarding an ongoing federal investigation. "You arrived right on time." The agent nodded respectfully. "We appreciate your cooperation. We will have a team stay behind to take your official statement regarding the break-in." He turned his attention back to his prisoner. "Let us move him out." I watched as they marched Richard out of my apartment, dragging him away to face the absolute ruin of his fraudulent existence. The heavy footsteps faded down the metal stairwell, leaving behind a sudden profound quiet in the loft. Megan was still sobbing weakly on the floor. Catherine remained unconscious near the doorway. I ignored both of them. I slowly turned my back on the chaos, carefully pivoting on my crutches, and navigated toward my small modern kitchenette. My spine burned with a deep throbbing exhaustion, but my mind was incredibly light. I picked up my electric kettle and hit the power button. I selected a premium chamomile tea bag, placed it into my favorite ceramic mug, and waited for the water to boil. The flashing red and blue lights from the street below continued to dance across my ceiling. I poured the steaming water into the mug, watching the calming herbs steep. I lifted the cup to my lips, savoring the rich floral aroma. I stood there in the quiet dawn of the Chicago morning, surrounded by the total devastation of the people who had tried to discard my life to save a few dollars. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. It tasted like absolute freedom. 3 months later, the American justice system delivered its final devastating verdict. The federal trial was swift, brutal, and entirely one-sided. Because I had systematically frozen their corporate and personal accounts before the raid, Richard and Andre did not have the capital to hire the elite, high-powered defense attorneys they always boasted about. They were forced to face the furious, fully armed Department of Justice with severely limited legal representation. Thanks to my unredacted forensic ledgers, the irrefutable server data, and my legally protected testimony, the prosecutors did not even need to offer a plea deal. Richard and Andre were completely eviscerated in federal court. The judge handed down maximum sentences for conspiracy, extensive Medicare fraud, and severe money laundering. They were both transferred immediately to a maximum security federal penitentiary to begin serving their time. But the prison sentences were not the true punishment. The real agonizing execution was the absolute, unyielding power of federal asset forfeiture. The government seized absolutely everything they touched. The massive suburban estates, the hidden offshore accounts, the luxury vehicles, the designer jewelry collections, and the bloated corporate retirement funds were legally confiscated by the state to pay restitution to the defrauded Medicare system. My father built his entire arrogant identity around his immense wealth and his perceived superiority over the vulnerable. He always believed his money elevated him above the basic suffering of normal people. The universe, however, possesses a brilliant, razor-sharp sense of poetic justice. 6 weeks into his federal sentence, the mounting stress of his total ruin finally broke Richard physically. He suffered a mild but terrifying heart attack in his cell block. Before the federal raid, Richard possessed a premium platinum-tier concierge medical insurance policy. If he had experienced a cardiac event while running Oasis Care, he would have been instantly airlifted to a private luxury recovery suite with a dedicated team of elite cardiologists catering to his every single demand. Instead, because his assets were completely frozen and seized by the government, he was entirely at the mercy of the underfunded, overburdened Federal Bureau of Prisons healthcare system. He woke up handcuffed to a metal railing in a bleak, poorly lit prison infirmary. He was forced to lie on a thin, highly uncomfortable plastic mattress, eating low-grade cafeteria food, and waiting hours for an overworked prison nurse to bring him basic generic blood pressure medication. He complained to the prison warden, demanding to be transferred to a private medical facility. The warden simply laughed and told him that the federal budget did not cover luxury accommodations for convicted felons. He was trapped in a dismal, substandard medical facility because the people in charge deemed premium care too expensive to waste on a useless liability. It was the exact same miserable fate he had forced upon his elderly, vulnerable Oasis Care residents. More importantly, it was the exact same death sentence he had enthusiastically ordered for me when he signed that Do Not Resuscitate form in the intensive care unit. He wanted to save money by letting me die on a hospital bed. Now he was fighting for his own miserable life on a cheap plastic mattress completely stripped of his precious wealth and his false dignity. The brutal, perfect irony was absolute. While Richard and Andre were trading their tailored Italian suits for standard-issue orange jumpsuits, Catherine and Megan were experiencing their own brutal descent into reality. The federal asset seizure did not spare the family members who lived off the stolen funds. The government evicted them from their massive, pristine estate, seizing everything down to Catherine's diamond tennis bracelets and Megan's expensive designer shoes. They were forced to relocate to a cramped, dilapidated two-bedroom apartment in a rough, neglected neighborhood on the far south side of Chicago. The pristine, wealthy socialites who used to mock my perfectly functional studio apartment were now learning how to navigate shared coin-operated laundry machines and broken heating radiators. Catherine was completely blacklisted by her elite country club circle. The women who used to drink mimosas with her now actively crossed the street to avoid being associated with the wife of a convicted federal fraudster. Catherine had to learn how to clip grocery coupons, engaging in the exact same survival tactics she used to ruthlessly mock me for utilizing during my college years. But Megan's punishment was far more direct and intensely personal. The massive legal fees and restitution orders completely drained whatever minor cash reserves they had desperately managed to hide. For the very first time in her 28 years of life, the golden child was forced to actually work for a living. She could no longer play the role of a self-made influencer. She had to get a minimum wage job just to keep the electricity turned on in their crumbling apartment. She ended up finding a job as a basic retail cashier. The universe's sense of humor truly peaked with her placement. The corporate coffee and retail chain that hired her had recently leased a large high-traffic storefront in a highly sought-after commercial building on Oak Street. It was my building. The exact same premium commercial property I had purchased through my blind trust Obsidian Property Management. The exact same building where she had been publicly and humiliatingly evicted from her fake cosmetics boutique during her live stream. Now she stood behind a basic cash register in a cheap, scratchy polyester uniform, ringing up sales and wiping down sticky countertops with a damp rag. She was no longer the CEO, she was replaceable hourly labor. Every Tuesday morning, I conducted my routine property management inspections. My spine was healing beautifully, allowing me to walk confidently without my crutches. I wore a sharp, custom-tailored navy blue blazer, holding my head high as I entered the sleek lobby of my own commercial property. I walked directly past the retail storefront where Megan worked. I never stopped to gloat. I never walked inside to order a coffee or demand she ring up my purchase. I did not need to say a single word to her, The punishment was simply existing in my own success. I would walk past the large glass windows reviewing the building's financial manifests, with my property manager projecting absolute authority and legitimate hard-earned wealth. Megan would stand rigidly behind her cash register, gripping the barcode scanner with trembling hands. She had to watch her sister, the woman she had mocked and dismissed as a pathetic, useless burden, walk through the highly profitable commercial property as the supreme, undisputed owner. She had to look at my tailored suit and realize that her minimum wage paycheck, the money keeping her and Catherine from starving in a slum, was indirectly funded by the commercial lease I authorized. I was the landlord. She was the absolute bottom of the food chain. I stepped out onto the expansive rooftop terrace of my newly acquired corporate headquarters. The bitter, freezing Chicago wind whipped aggressively through my hair, but I did not shiver. I walked smoothly across the polished stone tiles, entirely without a medical brace, without a limp, and completely without the suffocating weight of my past. My independent forensic accounting firm Apex Data Solutions had just expanded to occupy the entire top 3 floors of this skyscraper. I rested my hands on the thick, tempered glass railing and looked down at the sprawling, bustling metropolis, pulsing far below me. The city was a vast network of power and capital, and I had carved out my own undisputed kingdom right at the top of it. For 32 years, I was systematically conditioned to believe that my worth was intrinsically tied to my father's corporate approval. I was maliciously programmed to accept the tiny scraps of affection they threw at me while I did their heavy, dangerous lifting in the dark. I spent my entire youth and the prime of my professional career desperately starving for validation from people who were fundamentally incapable of loving anything other than their own bank balances and their superficial reflections. Standing here now, breathing in the crisp, electrifying air, I realized exactly how incredibly small and pathetic they actually were. I did not need their empty recognition. I did not need their fake performative holiday dinners. I absolutely did not need their toxic conditional version of kinship. The physical scars on my spine would always be there, a permanent silver roadmap of the trauma I survived, but the emotional chains were completely shattered. They built a fragile glass house funded entirely by predatory exploitation and held together by constant exhausting deception. The moment real adversity struck, the moment my life became a perceived financial liability, they shattered that glass house themselves. They arrogantly thought their stolen money insulated them from the basic laws of consequence. They failed to realize that money is simply a neutral tool. In the hands of a sociopath, it buys a temporary fragile illusion of superiority. In the hands of a brilliant forensic accountant, it buys absolute, uncompromising, and permanent justice. I looked at the sleek silver watch on my wrist, a gift I bought for myself to celebrate my company's latest 8-figure acquisition. I was alive, I was thriving, and I was completely untouchable. I had ruthlessly amputated the diseased, rotting limbs of my family tree, and as a direct result, my own life was finally flourishing in the sunlight. I had recently taken a massive portion of the legitimate profits from my real estate portfolio and established a victim restitution fund. The money was dedicated entirely to providing premium comprehensive legal and medical advocacy for elderly patients who had been financially abused and neglected by predatory healthcare corporations. I was actively repairing the exact same damage my father had inflicted on the world. I was writing a completely new legacy, one built on absolute integrity instead of ruthless exploitation. People in my industry often ask me if I feel any lingering guilt about systematically destroying my own flesh and blood. They wonder if the complete eradication of my father's empire and my sister's vanity was too severe a punishment for a family disagreement. I always give them the exact same unwavering answer. I did not destroy them. Their own unrestrained greed, their profound arrogance, and their terrifying lack of human empathy engineered their complete downfall. I simply handed the United States government the highly organized receipts. I accelerated the inevitable collision between their crimes and the law. I turned my gaze away from the bustling city streets and looked straight out toward the endless open horizon over the lake. The sky was clear, bright, and completely unclouded. I had survived the darkest, most terrifying night of my existence, and I emerged from the wreckage forged in absolute steel. When they stood in that sterile hospital room and signed that paper refusing to save my life just to protect their wealth, they did not know they were signing the death warrant for their own lives. They weighed the cost of my shattered spine against the price tag of a luxury sports car and a lakefront mansion, and they enthusiastically chose the real estate. They taught me the ultimate defining lesson in human valuation. Family is not blood. Blood is nothing more than a random biological accident. Family is the person who chooses to hold your hand when you stand on the absolute borderline between life and death. I turned my back on the skyline and walked confidently back into my corner office. The high-capacity servers were humming quietly in the background. The business was booming. The complex, chaotic ledger of my life was finally permanently balanced. The story of Riley serves as a powerful testament to the fact that our true worth is never defined by the people who fail to see it, even if those people happen to share our DNA. For years, Riley was conditioned to believe her value lay solely in her usefulness to a toxic, narcissistic family dynamic. When her father callously signed a Do Not Resuscitate order just to protect his fraudulent wealth, it was the ultimate betrayal, but it was also a brutal awakening. The most profound lesson here is that family is not an unconditional blood contract. It is a title earned through unwavering support, especially when we are standing on the precipice of life and death. Her journey teaches us that genuine security does not come from appeasing those who exploit us. It comes from radical self-reliance and the profound courage to sever ties with toxicity. By breaking free from the illusion of familial obligation, she transformed her deepest trauma into an impenetrable shield of independence. We must learn to audit our own relationships, holding on to those who genuinely invest in our well-being, and cutting off those who drain our spirit.